Once upon a time, in the heart of Georgia, there stood a house that knew how to breathe. I know its rhythm as well as my own. In the morning, when the first rays of the sun filter through the ancient pecan trees in the garden, it draws a quiet, deep inhale, and dust motes dance in pillars of golden light. In the evening it exhales, cooling down, and the old beams creak as if sighing, settling in for the night. I have lived here for 40 years. I have grown into these walls, or perhaps they have grown into me. My father-in-law, Cornelius' father, a man with a steady gaze and a wide soul, built this house not as a mere dwelling, but as a legacy, a place where his grandchildren and great-grandchildren would laugh, a sanctuary of strength. This morning, I was making soup as usual, simple chicken broth with dumplings, the way grandmother taught me. Cornelius eats almost nothing lately, but the aroma of the broth is so familiar, so like home, that it sometimes sparks a flicker of interest in him. I was cutting carrots into tiny, jewel-like cubes, remembering how I taught our son Travante to do the same. He was little then, standing on a stool beside me, his chubby fingers clutching a safety knife. "Mama," I would shout, and we would both laugh. That laughter still lingers in the grain of the kitchen table. "That tasteless slop again, Missila." The voice of Kessia Travant's wife shattered my memories like a draft in a warm room. "We talked about yesterday. The internet has a million recipes: broccoli cream soup, gazpacho. Can't you master something new? It's for Travante. He needs proper nutrition." She stood leaning against the doorframe in her ecru silk robe, arms crossed over her chest. She never called me mom. Only Ms. Idella, with a cold politeness worse than outright rudeness. I didn't turn around. I just kept stirring the broth. "Your husband loves this soup," I replied quietly, "and Heather loves it." "Father doesn't understand anything anymore," she cut in. "But Travante deserves better." They had been living with us for 3 years, ever since Cornelius had his first stroke. At first, it seemed right families should be together, especially in hard times. I gave them the entire second floor, the master suite with the balcony overlooking the garden. Cornelius and I moved downstairs to his former study so he wouldn't have to climb the stairs. Gradually, their things, their habits, their smells, Kessia's sharp perfume, Travante's tart cologne began to displace the air of this house. Last week, she moved grandfather's armchair without asking, the one with the worn armrests where my father-in-law used to read the Savannah Tribune. She shoved it into the darkest corner and installed some soulless white contraption of metal and leather in its place. "It doesn't fit the modern interior," she tossed over her shoulder. I said nothing then. But at night, when everyone was asleep, I went downstairs and stroked the old, cracked leather like one pets a faithful dog. I remembered how Travante used to fall asleep in it, cradled in his grandfather's arms. How I sat in it myself while pregnant, reading history books, dreaming of returning to my work at the archives once my son grew up a bit. But he kept growing, and then came Cornelius with his career, demanding constant attention, and my dream quietly gathered dust like old tomes in the attic. Cornelius lay in the study, staring at the ceiling. His body had weakened, but his mind sometimes flared with its former clarity like an ember in a dying fire. I walked over, sat beside him, and took his hand. His skin was dry and like parchment. "How are you, my love?" I whispered. He slowly turned his head. His eyes focused on me. "They are noisy," he exhaled. Yes, they were always noise, their voices, their arguments about money, their loud laughter. All of it was alien to the quiet, grounded life of our home. Travante came down for lunch. He didn't say hello, he just sat at the table and stared at his phone. I placed a bowl of soup before him. He pushed it away. "Ma, we need to talk." Kessia materialized beside him, sitting opposite, folding her hands on the table. In her eyes was that predatory glint I had learned to recognize. It meant they were plotting something. "We've been thinking with the inheritance and all these complications, bureaucracy," Travante began, not looking up from the screen. "Father is in such a state. To avoid problems later, you should sign the house over to me now, a deed of gift. It's just a formality to simplify everything." My chest went cold, not from the words themselves, but from the casualness which they were spoken, as if he were asking for the salt. "No," I said. My voice didn't tremble. "This house belongs to your father and me. As long as we are alive, everything stays as it is." "So, you don't want to simplify things?" Kessia leaned forward. "You want your only son to run around government office later, gathering certificates when, well, you understand." "I understand everything," I replied, looking her straight in the eyes. "And that is exactly why the answer is no." Trevant finally raised his head. There was no filial love in his gaze, only cold, angry irritation, as if I were not his mother but an annoying obstacle. "I don't understand what the problem is. We live here. We take care of father. You live in my house." I corrected him. "You live in my house. I take care of father." At that moment, Cornelius appeared in the doorway of the living room. He stood leaning against the jamb, breathing heavily. He must have heard everything. His gaze was surprisingly clear. He looked not at me, but at Trevante. "You," his voice was weak, but every word rang in the ensuing silence. "You are a disgrace to our name. A disgrace." That word struck Trevante like the crack of a whip. I saw his face contort. It wasn't just anger, it was the rage of a man touched in his sorest spot. His vanity, his right to bear the Dubois name, of which he was so proud. His whole life was built on that name. He screamed, jumping up so fast the chair fell with a crash. "A disgrace? Are you out of your mind? I am the only one continuing this name. This house, it is mine by right. It should have always been mine." He stepped toward his father. I jumped up, standing between them. "Trevant? No, I am tired of this." His eyes were wild. "This is ours now." He grabbed me by the shoulder, not painfully, but with authority, and shoved me aside. Then he grabbed his father under the arm. Cornelius was as weak as a rag doll. Trevant dragged us through the hallway to the heavy oak door leading to the basement. "Trevant, what are you doing?" I screamed, resisting. "You'll have time to think about your behavior," he growled. He threw the door open, and the smell of dampness and cold earth hit our faces. He roughly shoved us inside onto the top step of the steep staircase. I barely held on to Cornelius to keep us from rolling down. The door slammed shut, plunging us into darkness. The heavy bolt clicked from the outside. We were left in complete silence, broken only by my ragged breathing and the weak, raspy breathing of my husband beside me. I sank onto the cold stone step, clutching Cornelius to me. The tears wouldn't come inside, everything had gone numb. Years of service, years, my whole life given to this boy, this house, this family. All of it ended here, in this dark, damp basement. I was broken, shattered into pieces. And in this deafening silence, in this absolute darkness of despair, I heard my husband's quiet, tense whisper. He pressed his right to my ear, his words barely audible. "Hush. They don't know what lies behind that wall." My husband's words pierced the gloom, and I froze, listening. Above our heads, Trevant's heavy, quick footsteps rang out, followed by Kessia's lighter, pattering tread. The front door slammed so hard a dull echo rolled through the basement. A moment of silence, and then came the sound of an engine starting, quickly moving away and fading. They were gone. We were left alone in the cold, ringing silence of our own home, locked in its stone belly. "Help me," Cornelius rasped. His voice was weak, but there was a steely persistence in it I didn't recognize. I helped him up. His body trembled from weakness and cold. Slowly, step by step, we descended the chipped stairs to the dirt floor. It smelled of stale vegetables we used to store, damp clay and oblivion. The only source of light was a thin strip breaking through from under the door upstairs. In this dim twilight, I could barely make out the shapes of old shelves covered in cobwebs and empty jars piled in the corner. Cornelius led me not to the shelves, but to the far wall, to the very masonry of the foundation. He leaned against the rough, damp stones, breathing heavily. "Here," he whispered. "Father showed me when I was 18, said it was for the most extreme case. I thought it would never come." He ran his hand along the wall, searching for something by touch in the gloom. Finally he stopped. "Press?" "I don't have the strength." I touched the stone where he pointed. One of the rough granite blocks seemed no different from the others. But when I pressed harder, it gave way, sliding inward with a quiet scraping sound. Behind it, a black square void opened up. Inside this niche, something dark lay hidden. I reached in and felt cold, smooth metal. It was a small tin box, an old tobacco tin, the kind popular in my childhood. I pulled it out. It was light, almost weightless. We returned to the steps and sat side by side. Cornelius took the box from me. His fingers struggled with the simple latch for a long time. Finally, with a quiet click, the lid opened. I expected to see anything: old photographs, maybe a few gold coins hidden by my father-in-law for a rainy day. But inside there was nothing shiny, only a few yellowed papers folded in quarters. Cornelius took out the top document and unfolded it. Even in this faint light, I saw the official seal in faded violet ink. It was a birth certificate. "Read it," Cornelius said. I took the paper. It was fragile as an autumn leaf. The name written in calligraphy was unfamiliar: Cassius Thorne. Place of birth: a prison hospital in Mississippi, a place I'd only heard terrible stories about. Mother's name, dashed out: father's Orion Thorne. "I don't understand," I whispered, looking at my husband. "That's me," he said quietly. "That is my real name." Something snapped inside me. For 40 years I had lived with Cornelius Dubois, son of the esteemed Dr. Dubois, heir to a famous family. And now, this fragile sheet of paper was telling me I didn't know the man I had shared a bed with, raised a son with, built a life with. He took out the next document: an adoption decree. Cassius Thorne, adopted by Citizen Dubois, Langston James. The new son is assigned the surname Dubois and the name Cornelius. Everything was certified with dry official stamps. The last item in the box wasn't an official paper, but a letter written in the familiar, confident handwriting of my father-in-law. Cornelius handed it to me. "Son," I read mentally, struggling to make out the words in the dark. "If you are reading this, it means dark times have come, and I am likely gone. I never told you the whole truth, fearing it would break your life. Your father, Orion Thorne, was a brilliant scientist, an honest and brave man. But in our country, honesty and courage often become a crime. He was slandered, labeled a threat to national security, traitor, and he perished in prison. I was his friend and colleague. I promised him I wouldn't let his son be lost. I adopted you, gave you my name, my family, to protect you, to erase the brand of a traitor's son. Live with dignity, Cornelius. Wear the Dubois name with honor, but never forget whose blood flows in your veins, the blood of a brave man." I read to the end and slowly folded the letter. The cold that had started in the basement was now coming from within, chilling me to the bone. All these years, Cornelius had lived with this secret. He feared the shadow of the past. He protected a name that wasn't his by birthright. And Travante, our son, he had built his whole life, his entire pride, on this name. He boasted of his grandfather, the doctor, his pedigree, his heritage, a heritage that didn't exist by blood. All the pain, all the humiliation of the last few years, all the insults I had swallowed like bitter medicine, it suddenly compressed into a single point in my chest. But it didn't explode in a scream or tears. It froze, turning into an icy, perfectly clear crystal. And in its cold facets, I saw everything with dazzling clarity. I was an archivist. I worked with documents, with facts, with histories people tried to forget or rewrite. I knew the value of truth locked in yellowed paper, and what I held now wasn't just a family secret. It was a weapon, absolute, undeniable power. We sat in the dark for 2, maybe 3 hours. Time lost its flow. Cornelius dozed off, leaning his head on my shoulder, exhausted by the tension. I sat motionless, staring into the darkness, and my mind for the first time in years worked precisely and silently, like a well-oiled machine. A plan formed itself, logical and cold. Finally, noise was heard upstairs. The bolt slid back with a sharp scrape. The door flew open and bright light hit my eyes. Travante stood on the threshold, his face smug. "Well, have you thought it over?" he asked with a sneer. "Father, do you feel bad? Should I call a nurse?" He was clearly playing at magnanimity. It was part of his game. "Yes," I said, rising. My voice sounded steady and calm, surprising even myself. "He needs care. Give me the phone. I'll make a call." He was momentarily confused by my submission, but then smirked, handing me his mobile. "Here, one call to arrange a nurse and no funny business." I took the device. Its warmth contrasted with the cold of my fingers. I didn't search for a number in the contact list. I knew it by heart. A few years ago, I had read an article in Essence magazine about a female attorney specializing in complex family cases and inheritance. She was described as brilliant and uncompromising. I memorized her name just in case, as it turned out, not in vain. I calmly dialed the number. Travant looked down at me, expecting to hear my conversation with some caregiving service. A crisp female voice answered. "Vada Sterling speaking." "Ms. Sterling, good afternoon," I said just as evenly and clearly. "My name is Idella Dubois. I urgently need your help." I arranged a meeting with Vada Sterling. Without changing my expression, handed the phone back to my son. He took it with lazy curiosity, scrolling the screen to check who I had called. The number was unfamiliar, without a name. He apparently decided it was a care agency, and complete satisfaction reflected on his face. He had won. The old mother was broken and submitted. "Good girl," he tossed out, more to himself than to me. "A sensible decision. Come on, Kessia, let's help father up. It's not fitting for him to sit on the steps." They helped Cornelius to his room with that exaggerated, showy care that hurts the eyes with its falseness. They tucked him into bed, adjusted the blanket. Kessia even brought a glass of water. They were acting out a play of magnanimous victors, and I was their main audience. I watched, silently, and they mistook my silence for capitulation. That was their first and main mistake. In the following days, a strange, unnatural silence reigned in the house. I performed my duties with mechanical precision. Cooking broths for Cornelius, cleaning rooms, doing laundry. I moved through the house like a ghost, a shadow of myself, and this suited them perfectly. They stopped noticing me the way one notices old furniture. I became part of the interior, convenient and mute. And this gave me what I didn't have before, the opportunity to listen and see. They stopped hiding. They decided they could talk about everything in front of me. After all, a broken spirit is incapable of resistance. One morning at breakfast, while I was silently serving biscuits, Kessia, flipping through some glossy magazine, said to Travanti, "Honey, I've been thinking. That wall between the living room and father's study, it's not load-bearing. If we tear it down, we'll get a huge space, a studio. We can put a white marble bar counter right here." I froze for a moment with the skillet. The wall she wanted to demolish my father-in-law's desk stood against that wall, where he wrote his last medical journals. Against that wall, Cornelius taught little Travant to write his first letters. There on the wallpaper, if you looked closely, you could still make out a faint pencil mark. "Our son's height at 5 years old." She spoke of it as if it were just an annoyance on the way to a bar counter. "Great idea," Travant responded, not looking up from his coffee. "The study will be free soon anyway." "And the library?" "Well, the books can be sold for scrap or recycled. Who reads them nowadays?" Recycled books. My father-in-law collected them all his life. Rare editions on Black history, leather-bound volumes with gold embossing, books signed by the great minds of the Harlem Renaissance. Recycled. I placed the plate of biscuits on the table. My movements were fluid, not a muscle on my face. Inside me, something cracked and broke off the last shard of maternal illusion that there was still something left in my son, of the boy who listened with delight as his grandfather read aloud to him. They saw my calmness and mistook it for apathy, for senile detachment. They didn't understand that this was the calmness of a surgeon studying the chart of a diseased organ with cold attention before picking up a scalpel. Every word, every gesture, was for me a symptom of their disease, a disease named greed and vanity. The apotheosis of their delusion came on Tuesday evening. They approached me as I sat by Cornelius' bed, reading old poems to him aloud. They entered with the same serious, concerned faces one wears when visiting the hopelessly ill. Mom, Travant began in a tone full of fake sympathy. Kessia and I have discussed everything. We understand how hard it is for you, all these worries, the house, father. You've laid your whole life down for us. You deserve a rest. Kessia immediately chimed in, placing her manicured hand on my shoulder. The touch was light, but I felt the cold seep under my skin. We found a wonderful place for you, Miss Idella. A senior living community, not some nursing home. No, an elite establishment just outside Atlanta, Pine Forest. A pond, 4 meals a day, medical care 24/7. You'll have your own cozy room, you'll be able to walk, read, socialize with people your age. We'll visit you on weekends. They looked at me, expecting gratitude. They sincerely believed they were doing me a favor. They were offering me, the mistress of this house, a cozy room in exchange for my past, my life, everything that was dear to me. They were proposing to tear me from the soil I had rooted into and transplant me into a government-issue pot. So I would quietly wither there, not hindering them from building their life on the bones of mine. I raised my eyes to them. I looked at Travante, at his face so like my father's, and at the same time so alien. I searched in him for at least something, a shadow of doubt, a spark of shame, but found none. There was only confidence in his own righteousness and slight annoyance that he had to waste time on these sentiments. At that moment, the last drop of my maternal love died. It didn't evaporate in anger, didn't drown in tears. It simply ceased to be, as if a spring snapped in an old clock, and the pendulum swinging for 40 years stopped forever. I looked at this man and saw before me not a son, but a stranger, a calculating, cruel stranger with my eyes. And this realization brought not pain but a strange, cold liberation. I owed him nothing anymore, neither love, nor forgiveness, nor pity. That is a very generous offer, I said quietly. My voice sounded hollow but steady. I need to think. Of course, think about it. Travant rejoiced, clearly pleased the scene had passed without tears or reproaches. We just want what's best for you. They left, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and absolute confidence in their victory. I remained sitting in the silence, broken only by the breathing of sleeping Cornelius. I looked at our photos on the dresser. Here we were young at our wedding. Here we were with little Travant on the beach at Tybee Island. A whole life captured in these frames, a life built on love, sacrifice, and as it turned out now, on lies. But even that lie was nobler than the ugly truth my son and his wife revealed to me today. I no longer felt like a victim. The feeling of resentment evaporated, leaving behind a void and a cold, ringing determination. They themselves erased everything that bound me to them. They freed me from the shackles of maternal duty. They underestimated me. They saw before them a weak old woman. They didn't know that quiet archives documents capable of changing the course of history, and that a quiet woman who worked with those archives all her life knows how to use them. Tomorrow, I have a meeting with Vada Sterling, and I will come to it not with a request for help, but with a ready battle plan. The next day I told Trevay I needed to go into town to pharmacy for a rare medicine for father that wasn't available locally. He gave me money for a taxi with an air of performing an act of the greatest charity. Kessia even helped me put on my coat, straightening my collar like one does with a child. Don't be long, Miss Idella. Lunch needs to be ready. I nodded and left the house, feeling their condescending gazes on my back. They were watching an obedient old woman heading out to run errands. They didn't know I was going to war. Vada Sterling's office was in a modern building in downtown Savannah, with high ceilings and quiet corridors. She turned out to be a woman of about 40, with a sharp, piercing gaze and a complete absence of fussiness. She didn't gasp, didn't offer sympathy. She listened. I spoke evenly, without emotion, laying out the facts. The humiliation, the demands, the deed of gift, the basement. When I finished, she was silent for a few seconds, looking at me. Do you have any documents confirming your rights to the house? She asked finally. Her voice was calm, but steel could be felt in it. I have something more important, I answered and took the tin box from my bag. I laid its contents on the polished table. The birth certificate in the name of Cassius Thorne, the adoption document, my father-in-law's letter. Vada put on her glasses and began to study the papers. She read slowly, attentively, as if absorbing every word. I saw her expression change. Professional interest gave way to surprise, then to the concentration of a strategist who has been dealt a winning trump card. She raised her eyes to me. There was no longer simple concern in them, there was excitement. Mrs. Dubois, this changes everything. Absolutely everything. The Dubois name isn't just a surname in certain circles, it is capital. Your son built his career, his connections, his entire status on this name. If it turns out he has no blood right to it, I understand that, I interrupted her. I want my house and my peace back. You will get much more, she said, and notes rang in her voice that stirred me. You will get justice. But I need time. I need to check some details. The name Orion Thorne, it vaguely reminds me of something. Let me work with this. I went home, leaving the documents with her, and plunged back into the gray, silent routine. Travant and Kessia, seeing I no longer raised the topic of the nursing home, decided I had resigned myself and was simply awaiting my fate. They already behaved like full owners. Kessia ordered furniture catalogs. In the evenings, they sat in the living room, loudly discussing which shade of gray would best suit the walls in their future studio. I walked past without stopping, but every word they said was deposited in my memory, becoming another stone in the foundation of my resolve. A week passed, a week of sluggish, tense waiting, and then Vada Sterling called me on the old landline when Travant and Kessia weren't home. Mrs. Dubois, can you talk? Her voice, suppressed excitement sounded in it. Yes, I am alone. I have news, and it is stunning. I pulled the archives, unofficial ones, of course. I had to use my father's old connections. He was a historian. What I found explains why Langston Dubois was so afraid of his adopted son's past. She paused, and I heard her catch her breath. Orion Thorne wasn't just a political dissident. That's too mild a word. He was one of the leading theoretical physicists of his time, a genius destined for great things. In the late 60s, he was part of a project of national importance, but he had his convictions. He refused to participate in developments that, in his opinion, could lead to catastrophe. They tried to convince him, then force him. He didn't yield, and then they broke him. They fabricated a case. He wasn't just accused of dissent, he was accused of treason, of passing secret data to foreign intelligence. I listened, and the cold that had settled in me in the basement seemed to turn into ice, binding my insides. There was a closed trial, Vada continued. His name was erased from everywhere, from scientific publications, from lists of institute employees. It's as if he never existed. But in narrow academic and government circles, his name is still remembered, not as a scientist, but as a traitor, a brand, a stain that doesn't wash away even after a generation. I was silent, lacking air. I sank to a chair. Do you understand what this means, Ms. Dubois? Vada's voice became quieter but more distinct. Your son Travant builds his business on connections. He prides himself on his lineage, his partners, his clients. These are people for whom reputation, purity of name, continuity of generations, everything. They do business with the grandson of the renowned Dr. Dubois. And now imagine what will happen to his business, to his position in society, when it turns out that he is actually the grandson of Orion Thorne, a man whose name, for them, is synonymous with treason. There it was. That was the weapon I had thought of. But it turned out to be not just a pistol, it was a bomb, capable of not just winning back my house, but destroying the entire world my son had so carefully built for himself. This won't just strip him of his inheritance, Vada finished. This will destroy him socially, professionally, financially. He will become an outcast, a pariah. For him and his wife, that is worse than death. I hung up the phone. I sat in the kitchen in silence. The sun shone through the window. A geranium bloomed in a pot on the windowsill. Everything was as always, but the world had changed. The stakes in this game had risen to the heavens. It was no longer about an old house and a humiliated mother. It was about the total destruction of my son's life. And I felt no horror, no pity, no maternal instinct that should have screamed inside me, protecting my child, whatever he might be. No, I felt only cold, eerie satisfaction, a sense of perfect, calculated justice. You wanted to take my house. You wanted to throw me into a home. You wanted to erase my life like unnecessary entry in a book. Fine. Let's see what it's like when your life is erased, when your whole existence, built on pride and lies, turns to dust from a single breath of truth. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked at the garden I had planted with my own hands, at the old pecan tree under which little Travanti played. I was saying goodbye to him, not to the man who now lived on the second floor, but to that boy I once loved more than life itself. Saying goodbye forever because I knew I would pull the trigger without hesitation. I stepped away from the window when I heard the sound of a calling up. They were back. My heart didn't flutter, it beat evenly, coldly, measuring out the seconds until the beginning of the end. I went out into the hallway to meet them, not as a servant, but as the mistress of the house. For the first time in months, I squared my shoulders. They entered laughing, laden with bags from expensive stores. Kef held a roll of wallpaper samples. They were in a great mood. Ms. Idella, you're here? Kessia tossed out, not looking at me. Travante, look, this pearl shade will look perfect in the foyer. They didn't even notice how I had changed. They were too absorbed in themselves, in their future, which they had already planned within the walls of my house. 2 days later, on Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. Travante went to open it, grumbling about visits without warning. I waited in the living room. I knew who it was. Vada Sterling stood on the threshold. She was dressed in a sharp, dark suit. In her hands was a thin leather briefcase. Behind her stood an official-looking man, a courier from a legal firm. Mr. Travant Cornelius Duos? Vada asked in an even business-like tone. Yes, and who are you? Travant measured her with an appraising look. My name is Vada Sterling. I represent the interests of the owner of this house, Idella Bois. This is for you. She handed him a thick envelope. Travant took it confusedly. He looked at me, then back at Vada. His face expressed complete bewilderment. Owner? What owner? This is my family's house. I would ask you to familiarize yourself with the document, Vada replied coldly. Kessia came out of her room, attracted by the voices. Seeing the strange woman, she frowned. Travant tore open the envelope with irritation. He began to read, and I saw the color slowly drain from his face. First bewilderment was replaced by anger, and then he lay loudly. Eviction? He laughed. Is this your joke? You hired this actress to scare us? This is just ridiculous. Kessia snatched the paper from him, ran her eyes over it, her face also twisted into a contemptuous sneer. Miss Idella, we thought you had fallen into apathy, but you, it turns out, decided to play drama. Very cute, but we don't have time for this. She turned to Vada. Miss, I'm afraid my mother-in-law has misled you. She is an elderly person, a bit out of her mind. With a triumphant air, she walked to the credenza, took a folder from a drawer, and pulled a document out of it. Here is the real document, the deed of gift. The house belongs to my husband, Travant Dubois. So you can use your papers as you see fit. She handed the document to Vada. Vada took it without even glancing at me. She held the paper up to the light, studied it carefully. Interesting document, she said finally, returning it to Kessia. Especially interesting is Mrs. Dubois's signature, so fresh, and the notary's seal. I know this notary, Mr. Henderson. It is a great pity that he passed away 2 years ago. It must be a very complex document if he had to notarize it from the other side. A ringing silence hung in the room. The laughter froze on Travant's lips. Kessia looked at Vada. Her face went white as a sheet. What are you talking about? She stammered. I am talking about the fact that this paper is clumsy, very clumsy forgery. Vada continued calmly, looking straight into Kessia's eyes. Forensics will prove this in one day, and then we will be talking not about eviction. but about grand larceny and fraud. That is a felony, several years in prison. Travant stepped forward. His face was crimson with rage. Who are you to threaten us in our own house? I am a lawyer and I do not threaten. I inform of consequences. The house, as already said, belongs to my client. This is confirmed by the will of her late father-in-law, Langston Dubois, the original of which I have. It clearly states that the sole heir to all his property is his daughter-in-law, Idella Dubois, in gratitude for her care of the family. Your father Cornelius was aware of this and never contested his father's will. She pronounced the word father with a barely perceptible pause. It was the first prick. Travant and Kessia exchanged glance. In their eyes, for the first time, I saw not anger, not contempt, but fear, real, animal fear of a beast cornered. They realized this wasn't senile dementia. This wasn't the impulsive act of an offended woman. This was a well-planned attack. We will contest it, Travant shouted. We will prove she is incompetent, that you tricked her. I am the only Dubois, the direct heir. I have a right to this house. Vada Sterling nodded slowly, as if she expected exactly these words. She took a step forward. Her voice became quieter, almost confidential, but all the more ominous for it. You can certainly try court proceedings contesting the will. But keep in mind, Mr. Dubois, to contest Langston Dubois's will, you will first have to prove to the court that you have a legal right to it, that you, as you put it, are a direct heir. And for that, she paused again, letting every word soak into the air. It will require a full and public clarification of the Dubois family genealogy. All necessary genealogical examinations and the unearthing of archival documents to establish, so to speak, the purity of the family line. She's silent, and in that silence I heard my own heart beating loudly. She didn't say anything directly. She didn't mention the name Thorne. She didn't speak of treason. She just threw that phrase onto the table. Full and public clarification of genealogy. And that phrase exploded in the room like a silent bomb. Kessia swayed and grabbed the back of a chair. Her face expressed horror and complete lack of understanding. Travant understood everything. He didn't know the details. He didn't know. But he heard in Veda's words a threat, aimed at the very heart of his world, the foundation of his identity. He paled so much his lips turned blue. They looked at me, at the quiet, gray-haired woman who had stood silently by the fireplace all this time. And in their eyes I finally saw what I had been waiting for. Not just fear, but realization. Realization that the old woman they had written off, whom they had locked in the basement, whom they were going to ship off to finish her days in a home, held the threads their fates in her hands, and she was ready to cut them. Vada Sterling nodded to me, turned, and walked out. The courier followed her. The door closed with a quiet click that sounded like a gunshot in the deafening silence. We were left, three of us, my son and his wife. The air in the room thickened, became heavy. It was hard to inhale. Travant was the first to recover. His initial shock was replaced by rage, dark, animalistic, sweeping away everything in its path. What was that? He screamed, turning to me. His face contorted, became alien, vicious. What have you done? You decided to destroy your own family? You conspired with that shark to throw us onto the street? He advanced on me, and for a moment I saw in his eyes the same madness as on that day he pushed us into the basement. But there was no fear in me. I stood motionless, looking him in the eyes. You don't understand what you've gotten yourself into, Kessia chimed in. Her voice broke into a squeal. She paced the room like a bird in a cage. Genealogy. What genealogy? What did she mean? Have you been hiding something from us? Some shameful secrets? They screamed, accused, threatened, said they would put me in a mental institution. Prove my insanity, that I would disgrace the Dubois name. They threw words like stones, trying to breach my silence, to force me to be afraid, to retreat. But their stones bounced off my calm confidence like peas off a stone wall.